we're looking at AI models versus Google. Google is itself an AI model and has been for some extended period of time, just not with a chat interface that was introduced by ChatGPT.
People that come through AI mode or people that come through ChatGPT convert at a higher rate, significantly. But I think a lot of companies, a lot of people are overwhelmed by everything that's happening with AI in their job, in their field, in the industry. What are your 3 tips or your 3 must-haves to do in any digital strategy when it comes to these things?
Try some other models besides ChatGPT because there are differences between them, really substantial differences.
Thank you very much for being here on the pod. I think a subject that a lot of people are having an interest in. We are in a time, in a very, how do you say this? Like there's a shift, a rift, an amazing thing happened in digital marketing, and you are, I think, right in the center of it. But before we get going, like, who are you? Tell us a bit about yourself and tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, appreciate that, Sean. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm very excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. I love the honesty and transparency that comes out in your, in the recordings that you've released. So that's what I'm going for here. That's me to a core. My name is James Wirth. I'm the managing director of product and growth at Citation Labs. We are a link building primarily, and our core is we're a link building agency. We sort of cover the gamut of across the board in terms of if you're looking for one local sponsorship, a link that you can feel good about, we can help with that. If you're looking for 500 or more links a month, we can help with that. If your content is rough and it's not showing up in AI prompt responses, we can help with that. So that's a little bit about what we do. And, in terms of the clients we work with, to get up to hundreds of links a month, we're talking about larger agencies, but at the same time, it could be a mom and pop shop that just wants to do some good in their local community. So we definitely truly cover the gamut from that perspective. And in terms of my role, I work a lot with our existing clients, help them understand how they can better utilize our services, help us understand how we can provide better service, and I will, as well as plugging into the upfront sales process. And then I work a lot with our tools, impact reporting, link gap analysis, AI visibility analysis. I'm deeply involved with those efforts as well. And I've been in marketing for 25 plus years. I think I need to update that soon to 30 years. I think we're getting close to 30 years. My first SEO project was taking text and loading it at the bottom of a page and changing the color so that the font color matched the background color and it wasn't visible by humans. That was my introduction to SEO back in the day. And it's evolved quite a bit since then. I'm really excited to be here and hopefully share some knowledge that will be meaningful to others.
Okay, well, you hit some spots there. I love the going back in time. When my first experience as a developer was my friend Patrick, who came to me, and we were at school. We were I think 13 years old, and he came to me with a book. Oh no, so he came to me and he just opened up Notepad on the computer and just typed some magical words, and I was like, suddenly the background was green. There was a picture of a turtle or something, and it said something about me. I won't say what it said. You're 13 years old. So then, and I asked him, did you get that? And the second thing is, he's like, the second day he came to me, he's like, Sean, look, I got this book. It's like, it was a little bit like HTML for dummies, but something towards that line. I went home, he gave me it. I went home with the book, and 3 hours later, I read the book back to back, and I knew everything. And the next day I showed him what we call a marquee, where the text goes left and right. I was like, Patrick is gay. This, and I had pictures and stars. You click with the mouse. So this is what sparked my journey. And I'm hearing kind of the same with you, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I didn't get into development necessarily, but but I've always focused more on the technical side of SEO, and now I'm vibe coding cool apps, things I always wanted to be able to build but couldn't write lines of code, and have always been a tinkerer and a refiner. So it's amazing to just get in under the hood of something, anything, and open it up and see how it works and see if I can find a way to improve it.
I think you kind of need that curious mind. That's something I always embrace myself, and I like in others as well. Because curiosity, it doesn't just, they say it kills the cat, but honestly, you get so far ahead of things because you actually have it. If you're genuinely curious, you're going to solve a lot of the problems, or at least start to understand them. And I think, as I said, right, there's a major shift happening in the landscape that you're operating in, the SEO, the AI, the LLMs, and everything else. And boy, um, let's start there. You mentioned a keyword AI. You also said LLM. You also said, a link building and everything else. I think let's start with this one. Many leaders in marketing and SEO, understand that the LLMs are becoming more and more of a game changer, whether it's AI overviews or AI mode, potentially, whether it is ChatGPT that's taking more place. But there's no clear-cut strategy, at least as far as we know. So let's start with, what are your 3 tips or your 3 must-haves to do in any digital strategy when it comes to these things?
Yeah, that's very open-ended. I appreciate that. Was sort of softball. You just lofted up in the air to me. And I'll see if I can knock it out of the fence. I think the key, number 1 is, and this might even be number 1, maybe number 2, is what we already talked about: curiosity. There's just so much changing. To your point, we're in the middle of, or maybe at the beginning of, a paradigm shift. It's not like we can look back over the past year and say, okay, clearly we've hit this new plateau. Everything is sort of locked in, or at least stable, and we can figure out where we go from here. That's not the case at all. It's changing so quickly. What was it last week? Etsy announced AI, or agentic e-commerce now, that where I can be in a chat conversation with an AI model and complete a transaction on Etsy without ever visiting the site. That is crazy. And imagine just fast forwarding probably between now and the end of the year, where who's going to be next? Probably the large percentage of smaller business websites will be able to be turned on to agentic e-commerce through integrations, because they're already on Shopify, WooCommerce, some other e-commerce platform built into WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, all of these sites where just instantaneously small businesses of all sizes and shapes are going to be able to offer their products and services online without someone ever visiting their website. Plus, all the major portals are going to be doing the same. It's going to be this crazy scramble that we're not even really seeing yet. And that's just the most recent shift. And so we can't look back and say, okay, now I am clear what I need to do as a business of any size. In fact, many of the early investments we've heard have not produced quality results, sustainable results, anything that's still able to, or that's able to be released to the market right now. So this constant shift, I think the key is.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to jump into this. You said something about the early investments that we did. Can you speak towards what were those early investments, and what were the goals, and what was the failure that you're talking about?
Yeah, everything from the on-site chat agents that would, there's the scenario. I can't remember the airline, and I probably shouldn't say it anyway, but there was the airline where the AI chat agent made up a bereavement policy and authorized a refund when one didn't exist. That level of hallucination, or when an AI model will infer something when there's no validation behind it, sort of thing. A number of examples like that. Other studies where it was a large investment into resources that haven't been able to deliver anything, to the point where teams were laid off before a solution to replace them was in place. And then they found out that the solution wasn't there and wasn't going to be available anytime in the future, and had to rehire those that the company had laid off. Those are kind of extreme examples, and relatively few and far between, but it's already happening. And so just this constant state of shift so far the dust has not settled whatsoever, sort of thing. So curiosity, I think that's the biggest thing. Be curious, to your question, the top 3 things. Be curious about what's happening in the market. Tune into it. Spend some significant amount of time seeing how it could affect a particular line of business or company or job or role, sort of thing, but not investing all of our time in it. We still need to focus on business as usual. Something that a lot of companies, larger companies, have had to do is make a shift in the market. Maybe it's because they're the 700-pound gorilla and they just got comfortable in the space and they took their eye off of competition. And before they knew it, they have some newer, nimble particular company really nipping into their market share and maybe taking big swaths of their market share, and they have to scramble. They can't stop everything that they're doing. They have to have the business as usual track while they also have let's stop the hemorrhaging. We have to triage the situation. We have to figure out where we can improve and adjust and not react, but respond. And that's what just about every business of any size, really, my recommendation, my counsel is look at that. Stay business as usual, of course, but also be curious. See what's changing for you in your space and, in your niche, down to the individual contributor level, as well as the manager, the middle manager, the C-suite, et cetera, et cetera. We all need to be keeping our eye on this shift while we continue to offer the products and services that have gotten us to where we are today. That certainly is true for Citation Labs. We're seeing link building be as effective, not to shift into pitch mode here, but we're seeing link building, it's being as effective or maybe even more effective. And I kind of have an idea why than it has been in the past. And so we have to be business as usual while we find out ways that we can better service our clients in the market that exists now, as well as prepare for and begin to adapt to and respond to the market as it shifts. Sort of thing. So curiosity, number one, and probably number two. And then number three is, I think, the business as usual aspect of it. We still need to be spending the majority of our time focused on providing the value that have gotten our clients to us in the first place. So let's keep our eye on that while we figure out where we go next.
I couldn't agree more. I think, again, I think it speaks towards what we said in the beginning. Curiosity, I think, is something where if you have a person working in your team that's curious about AI, about implementing AI, or how it can affect your business from onboarding clients faster, or facilitating customers easier, or just doing deeper research in a faster pace and getting ahead of the competition, I think that curiosity is the best. And then I like how you ended it with keeping business as usual. I think too many people, and I've spoken about this as well, I have shiny new object syndrome, so I can lose myself in something completely new and just go on and just go balls out, go crazy over AI essentially. And I can have a new hobby every month. Lucky right now has been very stable for the past year, heavily on AI and automation. It helps with the background also. But I think a lot of companies, a lot of people are overwhelmed by everything that's happening with AI in their job, in their field, in the industry. And it's difficult to stay business as usual. Now, at Citation Labs and in your role, you are, I think, as close as possible as somebody can be when it comes to the shift that's happening right now in marketing. And I think it's fair, we're seeing that many leaders, and I see it around everywhere, many leaders are really striving to boost their visibility in the LLMs, right? Everybody wants to get inside of ChatGPT. They want to be named because we're now all feeling, if I don't get into ChatGPT, I'm going to have an issue. How do I explain it to my stakeholders, my board, my investors? If I can't get my startup there, that's a problem. If I can get my enterprise there, that's a problem. If I can't get my local business in there, that's a problem. The only thing is, a clear strategy is very challenging because no one really understands how these LLMs work or interact with SEO, right? So if you had to advise a CMO or any SEO experts on key elements, I think you kind of hint towards one. It's kind of maybe your job as well, but I'd love to hear more about how these things play into effect. So what are the things to look out for in this field?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is so much that is changing. That's probably the thing that we know most clearly, is that things are changing a lot. What's interesting, though, is that we are still seeing, to a very, very large degree, the fundamentals of SEO are still working. Now, that doesn't mean that we've effectively applied all of the fundamentals to our websites, our apps, et cetera, because there has always been low-hanging fruit, things that were easy to get done in SEO. Then there's the heavier lift stuff, which maybe we didn't quite see the potential impact for, and we've ignored. But what we are seeing is the fundamentals are very much in play. The concept that that I hear and see when I open LinkedIn or something like that is just a constant stream of SEO is dead, SEO is dead, SEO is dead. And this is, I don't know, the umpteenth time that I've heard that in my career. And the majority of my career has been spent in search engine optimization. And so whether you want to call it SEO or AEO or GEO or whatever, fill in the acronym here sort of thing, I think it's pretty reasonable to just still call it SEO, and it's still working. So my recommendation and my counsel would be, don't panic right now. Just go back to the curiosity. And, I do a lot of yoga, and one of the concepts in yoga is the practice of yoga is to observe without judgment. And this is a really good time to apply that principle off of the yoga mat from the perspective of in our jobs, just to be aware, to be curious, to observe, to almost be a witness, a bystander, seeing all of these changes in the market, pique our curiosity. Let's figure out what this could mean down the road while we still stay grounded, stay balanced in our practice, in this case, the practice of business. And so if we could take, that concept, I would say that's the first thing is, please don't panic. We have a good foundation to work from in SEO, in online visibility, essentially, whatever we want to call it. And now let's see what applies to AI visibility as well, because there's this thing happening that happens a lot, Sean, where we're looking at AI models versus Google. But Google is an AI model, and specific Googlers have come out and said it's the same algorithm that's running AI overviews, that's running AI mode, that's running Google Gemini. And so it's a little bit of a misnomer to think about Google on one hand and AI models on the other hand, because Google is itself an AI model and has been for some extended period of time, just not with a chat interface that was introduced by ChatGPT. And so, I want to just remind everyone that Google is an AI model, and we're talking about our online visibility here. So let's just look at it from that lens and talk about a few things that have changed. One is reporting. The metrics that we relied on in SEO to report, those are for sure shifting. Clicks, traffic to a website, that's shifting pretty dramatically. The interesting thing is I think we could think about it as a little bit of a scale, a balancing scale, whereas before we relied very heavily on clicks, high number of clicks, lower number of conversions from those clicks. One thing that does seem to be shifting is clicks are going down, but conversions are going up, because these conversations that are happening in an AI chat environment when the traffic does happen, bring a much more qualified, much more informed user to the website to complete that transaction, whatever that transaction looks like, subscription, product purchase, et cetera, et cetera.
I love what you're saying here. And I don't observe without judgment, I believe you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Reserve your judgment. Observe without judgment. Yes.
Yeah. Observe without judgment. Indeed. I think that is something where I think it's going to be difficult for a lot of people in business and in their fields to do this. So it'll take some time. But and I loved also that you said, look, it's not just about observing and just not doing anything. It's about believing in the strong foundations that you have set up already. It's about continuing doing what you've already been doing that has gotten you where you are. And then at the same time, seeing how does the foundation that we have right now get us into these AI models? And then let's see if we can maybe work on something to, manipulate or nudge in a certain way to get the results that we're hoping for, obviously, at the end of the day, which is more visibility throughout the field.
Yes.
I then also really appreciate what you said about, I think there's no marketeer in the online visibility field that hasn't seen a CTR drop, right? I think 60% or 50% is very common nowadays. That okay, I got 10,000 people in traffic. No, now it's 4. Okay, I got 100,000. What's 40? Okay, well, we're all hurting. At the same time, I really appreciate the call out there, and I think the people that are judging too much on vanity metrics or too shocked at the moment because they're looking at, oh my God, I lost 40 to 60% of my traffic. But then we're forgetting something. people that come through AI mode or people that come through ChatGPT convert at a higher rate, significantly, as you mentioned as well. I think the numbers speak towards 3 to 9 times even, or even 10 times higher than normal because they've done their research. So let's imagine we're talking to a CMO right now, and they're in a position where they need to decide budget, right? And I'm seeing my traffic going down. I'm seeing my conversions going up. So part of me could say, well, if I don't need all that traffic, why should I continue investing more? So that's my first question. Should you be investing the same or continue on investing? Is it time right now to say, hey, I can cut some budgets because I can do it with less? But at the same time, what about the focus on AI? At some point, we're going to come to a position where the observing isn't feasible anymore because we need to move. And that's sometimes it's also internal pressure. It doesn't mean the market says it. But let's talk about those things. What about budget shifts, or are those needed? And what about how do I make room in my budget for the new LLMs and AI's options that are out there?
Yeah, great question. I would not recommend cutting budgets right now, but I certainly would look at how we're measuring our investments. What is the return that we're getting from those? And are we measuring the right things? To your mention, to your comment, your call out there, these vanity metrics that we've used. Like, it's weird to say this, but traffic in many cases is a vanity metric. Especially if that traffic is going to a low converting blog post or informational, it's driving visits to informational content that weren't converting before, at least not into revenue, but we just didn't need to measure it because we got maybe a little lackadaisical about how we were measuring the impact that we were having and the return on those investments. And so would I recommend cutting budgets right now? No, because we don't really know where the dust is going to settle. It hasn't even started yet. We're imagine remodeling a kitchen while we're living in the home. And yeah, we've got some visqueen covering across that part of the house, but we're still hearing the sawing and the hammering and the nailing, and we can't see anything going on in there. We just know that something crazy is happening. So I would not recommend cutting budgets right now, but I would recommend looking at doing a deep dive into how we're measuring things. Are we relying too heavily on those top level metrics like traffic? Can we be measuring more effectively down to revenue? That's a key aspect of it. And looking at, and another aspect of this is that's important too, is looking at the strategy that we have around SEO, the tactics that we're employing. Are they aligned with where we know visibility is coming from AI models? And this is one of these key aspects of the paradigm shift that you mentioned in the beginning, Sean, where we're seeing some changes. The fundamentals of SEO, AEO, GEO still are relatively untouched to a large degree, at least. But we have how we're measuring our impact that's shifting. And another thing, I think probably the biggest thing that I've noticed is shifting is content. And we've always talked about content being king, queen, supreme chancellor, whatever we want to call it. And that certainly is true today. Very likely, much more so, especially from the perspective of prior to this, even though Google's gotten and other search engines and models have gotten smarter about how we're looking at content, and we're way beyond keyword stuffing, and we're way beyond TF-IDF, and we're talking about vector embeddings. Vector embeddings haven't gotten nearly the credit and the visibility and awareness that they really should have, but we're shifting so quickly, we almost don't have time to focus on vector embeddings because we know that AI models are looking for this concept of chunked content that they can pull into a prompt response that is a complete topical sort of train of thought or concept from a particular page. And so we can't think about ranking our page anymore. We almost need to think about visibility around every sentence, every paragraph on our page, because that is very likely the only thing that would get pulled into that prompt response. So how do we make those sentences and paragraphs, how do we make them worthy of a citation in a prompt response? And now we're talking about a very different strategy around content. That's one of the biggest shifts that we've seen, and one of the areas that we've focused the most on over the past actually years, and really now kind of the market, I think, is sort of catching up to where we've been working around content. We've called them a number of things over time, but citable elements is the one that we've referred to the most. So what is this, this element on a page that is unique enough to justify a publisher giving you a link to include it, sort of thing? Why would this unaffiliated third-party site link to your content, especially link to your sales page or something that's lower in the funnel, sort of thing? How are you going to convince them to do that? And usually that's because you're offering something of value on that page. First-party data, some sort of deep dive analysis that you've done through your customer service logs, or something that's truly unique about your offering that no other website, no other publisher is talking about. How do we get that on the page? And that's the stuff that's getting absorbed into prompt responses. So the market has kind of been catching up with a lot of deep work that we've done around the customer journey, what's meaningful, the purchase decision committee that is represented by that ICP. We put this label on it. We assume it's this one person that is making a decision, but they represent a whole group of people, especially for complex transactions behind the scenes. How do we get the content on the page that they need to see, even when they may not know what they need to see? How do we get it on there? So beyond frequently asked questions, what about the frequently unasked questions and what we call friction-inducing latent unasked questions? Those gems, those elements that an individual representing whoever is behind the scenes for that transaction needs to know that they don't know. All they know is they're not quite seeing what they need to see on that page to commit, to convert. How do we get that information surfaced on that page in a unique and compelling way that an AI model would be interested in enough to give us a citation and include that in their prompt response? That's the stuff that we really need to be thinking about in terms of content.
James, you got me excited here. I'm not gonna lie, you got me really excited. Look, this is going on a lot, and I'm going to ask you a question here, because what's seeming to me is we're moving at least towards what the market is going towards and how to answer it, is we're moving from a outside in to an inside out perspective, or at least I feel that's a better way of strategizing. And to give you an example, we used to focus on, hey, I'm in this niche, I'm in this sector, I'm going to focus on these keywords. Now you're kind of saying, hey, you know what? Look more inwards. Find the things that make you special, whether that is, case studies, whether it's reviews, but find the thing that separates you from somebody else, from your competitor. Find the citable truth inside of you, like that gem, and hopefully you have multiple gems. Put them on your website, and then what you're saying is, and if I hear you correctly, is by utilizing things like, for example, link building, you guys offer as well, is, hey, create an ecosystem around those pages that you give a lot of value to. Am I correct?
Yep.
So that's what I'm saying. Like it's coming more. I feel like it's coming more from the inside out, where we're not going to vanity. It's almost like keywords are becoming a vanity metric as well, or not necessarily rankings in keywords. I'm not saying it has to be that way.
Yeah, kind of.
I feel like you're not aiming for the traffic of the keywords. You're aiming for the association with the keyword. So at least you get found. But the most important thing is, how can I influence? Now, what's going to influence me as a customer or as a potential customer? If I'm on your website, I will look at reviews. I will look at case studies. If I have a genuine interest, I will. And I love the fact how you said that's the thing that LLMs cite, because let's be honest, if I'm looking for, the best prompt dresses, or, the best, I don't know, cloud backup software, the LLM is smart enough to see these are reviews. It's going to look at Reddit. It's going to look at Quora. It's going to look at online reviews and questions and conversations. So what I'm hearing from you is, hey, yes, you have those online platforms where you can, I think, should be part of, my personal opinion, but there's so much inside that you need to be exposing up more. Correct?
Yes. Yep. Yes, yes, absolutely. That insight is what the LLM is looking for when they do that simulated. So we have some software we've built that simulates that query fan out that they do. And depending on the AI model you're using, we can sometimes see the number of searches they run, especially when it's something that they have to go out to the web to gather more information on to respond to. And sometimes you see it tick up to 100 or more searches that they're running just for that one, just to build the one prompt response to predict what you really want to, to hear. So depending on the prompt itself, they may go out and run 100. That fan out may involve 100 different queries that they run in order to aggregate and respond to that prompt response. What out of those 100 queries and all of the results that it pulls in and instantly analyzes, what is the unique element to your page if it's crawled, if it's available, what is the unique element on that page that they're going to include with that paragraph of text, maybe screen of text in the response that you're going to get? How are we setting ourselves apart? It's a very different consideration now. There's this it's a paradox sort of thing. We've thought about content in a very specific way. How do we get our page to show up at the top of results? We want to be in that top 10. We know people are not going to go beyond page 1, or very rarely, unless they absolutely don't find what they're looking for. And so that has been the gold standard, essentially. Get me onto page 1, get me to the top 3, top 5 results, ideally to position 1 in those results. And then the click comes from me selling that user, or Google selling that user by rewriting my title and my meta description and whatever information shows up in that snippet, that just little snippet of text. Now it's so different now. There is no snippet. There's just a piece, a gem, a piece of information, first party data, something unique, something of value that I might be able to offer, which may or may not involve a citation back to my site. It may not even mention my brand name, just some information that I can hopefully fill in, that if that user finds something of value and asks for more information, now I have a chance to actually get that link. Or, fast forward maybe just a few months, maybe they'll just purchase that product or sign up for that service right there in the AI response, right there in the chat conversation. So instead of thinking about getting our page to show up in results and the user then going through and doing their own filtering, how do we provide something of value, not on a bunch of obscure pages on our site, especially if it's something where it's lower in the funnel? We want a conversion. We want a transaction. We want a sign up of some kind. How can we get that sort of content, that gem of information, unique, first party, usable, valuable, onto our page so that the AI response can be included in the AI response? That's a real shift in thinking for marketers, for sure.
Yeah, and we're kind of making a full circle to where we started this conversation about the buying decisions happening right now in the conversation with the LLM, right? I mean, if you're doing your research in ChatGPT, or you're doing it, I don't know people that use Gemini, but some people might. So I'm just going to stick to ChatGPT for now. Okay. But even with the AI mode, right? Even with AI mode, you're going to have the benefit. You're going to talk to it, and as research has shown, you don't leave it. You stay there until you're ready to leave, because you're in the comfort of your own home. Essentially, you're having a conversation with a friend. You're getting some information. It helps you do research, and at some point you're like, hey, I feel love to make a decision, and when you do, I mean, there's not much that's going to prevent you from heading back, right? And I want to ask you one last question on this topic, which is, are we focusing more on bottom of the funnel for this? Are we focusing more on middle of the funnel, or more top of the funnel when it comes to exposing these internal insights, these unlocked gems, essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends, of course, is the answer that everybody hates, because it's not actionable at all for me just to say, Sean, it really depends. But it depends, because how much value is the business getting out of those top of funnel visits, responses, citations, that sort of thing? We've relied on them so heavily because as SEOs, the job is to get visitors to the site, to earn the click, to get that site, that impression, not just the impression, but the actual visit itself. And so the session and so we've measured on that, as you mentioned, as a vanity metric. But what did that really mean in terms of revenue, actually driving revenue for that business? And so I think it depends, because there are some exceptions that I've seen where that top of funnel informational query could result in revenue, sort of thing. But that's the exception, not the rule. So I think we really have to challenge our traditional thinking around that, around visits, around traffic, especially because, with so much of the experience of someone doing research, looking for information, making a decision, with so much of that happening in the chat now without visiting a website, and even the bottom of funnel being very close to happening in the chat now with the new partnership, the new integration with Etsy. Now someone can buy something off of Etsy without leaving the chat conversation. And if I'm running, growth at I don't know, WooCommerce or Shopify or Wix or Squarespace or any of the comparable platforms that have an e-commerce components, that enable e-commerce for businesses of all sizes, I'm going to be right there on the heels of this Etsy announcement. In fact, I've probably been working on it for months or years, and it just hasn't been announced yet. So what does that mean for bottom of funnel transactions also being completed completely in a chat response? So we already know that a lot of those higher funnel answers are being provided right in the chat response. Hopefully we have a strategy for visibility beyond those top of funnel queries kind of thing, those research sessions, those information sessions. Hopefully we've figured out how we can turn that into revenue beyond just someone visiting our site, because realistically, that may not happen. That really could not happen, and still businesses stay in business. It really is a paradigm shift for sure.
It definitely is. And right now we have the specific examples when it comes to e-commerce, and I can actually say that the CEO of Shopify has actually said that they already have their integration with ChatGPT, and it's coming live very soon. I'm not even sure if Sam Altman spoke about it on Dev Days yesterday, but it's coming. It's coming soon, very much. I think I just want to make sure we address this also towards our viewers. Is towards the question, like, is it the bottom, the middle, of the top of the funnel? The question is, look into your data, I think, and I want to come back on this a little bit later. But before, I just want to clarify two things. Because I have some interesting things I still want to really bend your ear about. And I think it's going to leap into this. But before that, I think we need to clarify two things to the audience. Can you clarify to us, explain to us what are vector embeddings and what's query fan? Let's make sure we all know what this is.
Yeah, vector embeddings. This is how Google, for example, looks at topics related to a particular query. So if, and there are a number of examples that are used, almost overused, because I don't think they really give it, full value for the complexity around these vector embeddings. But imagine being able to take a sentence, for example, and create a numerical value out of that sentence. So I've got imagine whatever sentence on your website there that may provide some sort of topical clue about what the page is about, what the offering is about, and take that and turn it into a number, like a hashed number, something really long. This is long value essentially, but it's a value, and so now I can take that value that I've created out of the words, turn that into characters, numerical value, and I can plot that in 3-dimensional space relative to the initial query that might land someone on that web page in the first place. And now I've got this three-dimensional model. Imagine this three-dimensional graph. And I've got value number 1, which is the query that someone types into Google. And value number 2 is the sentence in my, on my page that relates to that query. Not just in terms of how we understand the text from a language perspective, but we've quantified these. We've actually assigned them a value. And now we've got this three-dimensional space that we can then chart and compare these two different values to. One is the query. The other one is is my content that relates to that query. But now let's just use top 10 traditional responses, the 10 blue links that we know and love are certainly near and dear to my heart. And so now let's take the potential response from each of those 10 queries and add them to our three-dimensional space. So this won't be quite enough values, but imagine each one of those is one of my fingertips. So now I have the initial query. Let's just say it's right here on my glasses, the bridge of my nose. This is the query. Then I have the top 10 results in this three-dimensional space. I know this is a weird response, but the distance between the original query and each of my fingertips representing those traditional 10 blue links, one is going to be closer than the other. Let's put my thumb really close. Some of them are off the chart. They're not even there. Others are sort of hovering around the space. They're almost like in separate galaxies of this universe that's represented by my screen. I'm just coming up with this analogy off the top of my head. But one of them, the thumb on my right hand here, might look like my left hand to viewers, is closest out of all of these individual responses sort of thing, the top 10 results. When we embed these vectors, these vectorized values here, we can chart them in three-dimensional space and look at the proximity between the original query that someone typed into Google and these top 10 results. The one that is closest is considered to be the most relevant to that initial query. That is, in a really weird analogy with my fingers all over the screen, that's vector embeddings. And so we can think about some examples that are often used. They're escaping me because I can't think about them, in the moment. But essentially, if we change those values, essentially all these values here, the one that's my thumb, if I rewrite that content, or actually let's use my pinky over here because that's a better example. If I rewrite this content and its new vectorized value is closer to the original query, now I can optimize my content in a way that makes it more relevant to that original query, and Google is much more likely to show it in the top search results. Essentially, how can I get, just based on content alone, and there are a whole bunch of other factors, 10,000 sub-factors we think to Google's algorithm. There are all other things, but content, just looking at content alone, that would be an example of a vector embedding and how we can optimize that content and change it over time. There are, and Google certainly has been using this for an extended period of time. It just hadn't gotten very much publicity or awareness in the SEO community, and therefore in the broader, in broader marketing segments kind of thing. Or certainly business as usual, it really didn't get picked up too much in terms of vector embeddings. But there are a number of individual SEOs and thought leaders in the space that have written extensively about it, sort of thing. The information is out there and it's fascinating. We just have, as it was starting to raise awareness, ChatGPT came onto the scene, and we spent so much time focused on ChatGPT and what that means for marketing and commerce and everything else. And vector embeddings, which are very much a part of AI models, just really hasn't gotten sort of its due awareness at this point yet.
Isn't it great that right now we're getting to put more of a spotlight on it? Because essentially what we're saying is, I mean, to me, and think to the audience, like vector embeddings, I always relate it to something like it's we get told that ChatGPT, you ask it a question and it predicts the next word, and the way it does it is by looking at what's the closest to it. How can I get there, right? The frog jumped over or leaped over well, that's going to be pond, right? It's not going to be car. And those, like how those words relate. I love how you explain it, and I think it's a very underutilized scope when it comes to SEO, when it comes to anything, these things. But I think we kind of, based on your explanation, understand why. So it's a difficult subject, right? It's I've learned it.
Yeah.
It's you don't just get this taught at home or in school. This is a difficult subject to attain. So how can you, as a normal business, do anything okay, let's say I'm an SEO, or I work at, I'm in a company, and I want to improve my SEO. Like, how can vector embeddings be attainable to me? Like, how can I make it? How is it? Like,
They're
is it
pretty
possible?
accessible to, yeah, I'm sorry, say that again.
Oh, is it even accessible to the average human being, essentially?
Right. Right. That's a great question. It takes a little bit of work, but it's pretty accessible. Screaming Frog, crawling software that much of the SEO community knows and loves, even if we're using some other more enterprisey level crawling and analysis tool, we probably also have a Screaming Frog license. And because we can do these short runs of crawling a page, I use it constantly. I'm not even a generalist SEO. I'm squarely in the link building space, but I use it often to help me understand pages, even if it's just from the perspective of, is this page indexable? Is there a canonical? Is there a 301? That sort of thing. And so Screaming Frog they have a free version. You just can't save anything. But they also have it's a very light license. I can't remember what it is, $200 US or something like that. It's very accessible, not very expensive. There are also a number of free tools that will allow for vector embeddings to be understood. There are some Excel plugins that I know of. Notebook LM, I'm pretty sure there's a publicly available template for it in there. And the process is relatively simple. You crawl your pages with Screaming Frog. You add some custom code to Screaming Frog, which actually may even be built in now. It might even be native to the application. You just have to check a box or something like that. That's how you get the vectors. That's how you vectorize the content on a page. And then the Notebook LM or this 3D graphing tool, which I think it's a plugin to Notebook LM, that's how we look at our content in that three-dimensional space. That's how we do the actual embedding. So first we have to get the vectors assigned. We have to get those actual values. Then we look at it in 3D graphing software in order to see how close it is. We plug in the query that we want to rank for or want visibility around, and then we can see how close we are to it, essentially. And so it's really as an exercise to understand how modern visibility is gained, what we need to do in order to increase our visibility. It's an exercise well spent. You might want to find a contractor or a trusted consultant that can do it for you instead of, so nobody in the C-suite should be spending their time actually embedding vectors of their content. But it is a very useful exercise. It's a very, very interesting visual, what you get out of the exercise, and it's not really very expensive at all. I mean, the time and the software, it really is accessible and can be done in relatively short order, at least as an example of modeling out how content is looked at, today versus what we thought about it back in, as I mentioned, term frequency divided into inverse document frequency, TF-IDF, or keyword stuffing. And it's just counting up the number of times you mention a particular phrase on a page. Those are long in the past, but even TF-IDF was an early version of vector embedding. We just didn't think about it. The term vector embedding wasn't well known at that point, and so we had the TF-IDF example to use as a proxy. But that was vector embedding. Is vector embedding, and it's more sophisticated now, and it's worth the exercise to see what that looks like.
And again, we come back to the inside out. In my opinion, I feel like all of this is looking more inwards. Looking at how things correlate internally, because I can imagine if you do an exercise in your vector embeddings, you can then also predict how your next content is going to position itself inside of the rest of your content, right? So now your presentation, your classification, how you create a strategy kind of gets, it's not completely different, but you have a different metric that you can utilize to, decide where you go, specifically in this day and age where everything is so uncertain. We all feel so insecure about these things that it's not bad to have something that's calculated and mathematical that you can fall back on to kind of steer the ship a little bit. I don't think it's a bad idea. I love it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's an exercise that will, I think, open eyes internally, especially if an SEO is is having trouble getting traction, getting budget approved, if they're worried about their budget going away, sort of thing, a weekend, or a week is, small percentage of a week, for an individual contributor could result easily in being able to show some version of a vector embedding to help the higher ups better understand visually how content is becoming more and more important, how we have to stop parking our content or the real meaningful content, the deeper dive in content on a blog post somewhere that is maybe is not even in the main nav. Okay, might be a link in the footer. Might not even be there. We need to get that content on our sales landing pages. The AI models generally not going to crawl your entire site to build its prompt response. You maybe get one page. If it's not on that page, and we want that page to be available to the AI model as that user continues that chat conversation and gets closer and closer to the bottom of the funnel, where in that customer journey, they're going to make a decision about whether they're going to purchase a product or service or not. We want that valuable information on that sales landing page, not just parked somewhere off the site that may not even get discovered in the course of that, that chat conversation sort of thing. So we really got to get more buy-in internally if we want to be able to raise our visibility in AI models and continue to keep our jobs. Essentially, we really got to think about the hard work that we should be doing. You mentioned earlier, we were talking earlier about exploring AI, and I would say one thing that I've been really appreciative of at Citation Labs, and I've been really involved in this decision, is everybody has a little bit of time in their workload dedicated to exploring how AI could help them do a better job. And that means experimentation. And I would say that your challenge to you, Sean, is try some other models besides ChatGPT, because there are differences between them, really substantial differences. I know I'm going to throw a zinger at you, and I don't mean to call you out, but it happens to me too. I get really comfortable with one particular model, and there are pretty key differences with them. So I try to remind myself to get into a different one. Take that same prompt response. This is really interesting from an AI visibility perspective too, is this has really shifted compared to traditional Google search results. If I search for the same query in Google and I skip AI overviews and I just scroll down to the 10 blue links, the result, the order of the result, and the actual the brands, the pages even that are in that result are relatively consistent. They change from day to day. They might change partway through the day. But if I just hit refresh a few times, or if I open an incognito search, they're going to be relatively the same. But something that we've learned when comparing traditional AI results, Google AI overviews, ChatGPT prompt responses, Perplexity, throw that in there, Claude, is there's maybe at best 30% overlap between 2 or 3 different models in terms of actual citations in that prompt response. That's a paradigm shift for sure. And so this is a way that we can discover more about how a brand, how a particular product or offering is being represented in AI prompt responses, is using different platforms, because there's a high variability to those responses from one platform to the next. Even if I just refresh or run the same query in the same platform, there might be a big difference kind of thing. So we really need to be looking at our responses at scale. And that means on an individual level, using different platforms to research how my particular offering is showing up in those responses, those results.
Well, thank you for setting me straight there, James. I appreciate it. And I promise you, look, I use a few models. ChatGPT is my private right now, but I have used Perplexity. I've used Claude. I just can't get with the UI, but I've used Grok, Gemini.
We all have our favorites for sure. We all have our favorites.
I like AI Studio though, because I can test a lot of the new stuff that Gemini has. I love it for that reason, because it's free also. But you just said something super interesting. You said, we have the models, we have different models. Different models can behave differently, and different models can behave differently with the same question. Super interesting. Google is far more consistent when it comes to outputting information. Even AI mode I've seen is more consistent when it comes to giving an answer. It speaks to the question I asked before, is query fan out, right? So we're seeing models. You ask them a question, and what do? They nowadays more and more search the web. If we look back a year ago, ChatGPT wasn't capable of searching the web. Claude wasn't capable of searching it. Now they have the option. We saw them using Bing. I see them using Google. They use Brave Search, a lot of options. But one thing that they all seem to do is query fan out. So can you speak towards, and let's see if we can combine this, right? We have different models giving different responses to the same question, even if you reload it. And then there's this thing called query fan out. Like, how does, like, make it make sense, bro?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really challenging. The way that I think about query fanouts is the job of the AI chatbot is to predict what sort of response I want to hear based on the prompt that I have put in there. And, one thing that we know is, especially from the perspective of traditional search results, is we don't often know what we want to know, or at least we don't ask it in a way that is going to be able to predict with a high level of certainty exactly what we want. If that were the case, then nobody would ever have revised their query in traditional Google search results. Nobody would have, clicked on a result and then bounced back and clicked on a different result. Nobody would have closed their session and then gone back in later that day and asked almost the same question, but somehow informed a little bit differently. So we know that we don't always, just human behavior, we don't always ask exactly the right question as precisely as we need for an AI model to predict with 100% certainty exactly what we want to see. And they wouldn't give us a page in our response if they could predict precisely exactly what we wanted. So the query fan out is a way for them to gather in more information beyond what we asked in order to build that prompt response. And as we mentioned, it might be 100 different searches that it might fan out based on whatever my initial prompt is and the core elements of that prompt, and strip out all the stop words, strip out my conversational stuff, get rid of that, and the remaining core elements. That still is not enough for them for the model to build an appropriate response that's going to precisely predict what I want to hear. So it does this query fan out. It might be 10 searches that it runs, and to your point, it could go through Bing as ChatGPT initially did, and when they launched search, because of that huge investment from Microsoft, that partnership with Microsoft, and now and Perplexity was the first one to run its own queries, to do live, build its own database and run these live queries to better understand content. And now they all have some hybrid model that they're doing this. So whatever their sources are, they're going and gathering more information beyond what the training set that they've been trained on, beyond what they understand. They're querying their own index of data, just like a Google would in index of content. They're running these live queries. They're crawling the pages in many cases and returning responses, especially if we explicitly ask them for it. And then they're building their response based on all of these variations of what I originally asked. And essentially, are you familiar with Answer the Public? This is a really good example, and I've used the site a bunch. I haven't for a while, but Answer the Public, I give it an initial seed query, and it gives me all of the questions in this really cool kind of visual, all of the questions that might be associated with that particular seed query when my seed query wasn't asked in the form of a question. And so think about the who, what, when, where, and why, and all the variations of how it might ask. That's essentially an example, a visual example of query fan out. I take my seed query and I go run all of these different versions of that to get more information. And so there are a whole bunch of tools, including one that we've put out there. It's available for free. You can go to xofu.com and run your own, put your brand in there, and it will return a list of simulated query fanouts based on ChatGPT API queries in the background, et cetera, et cetera. The technology doesn't matter so much. Just find a tool that you're comfortable with and try it and see what and of course, do your own prompting as well in your favorite tool, in a couple of other tools. Find a free or inexpensive way to do it via API call. That's a really interesting way. You strip out the interface altogether and just look at it in a Google Sheet or something like that. That prompt response and how it's delivered kind of thing will really help us understand. Oh, and there are a number of browser plugins that will show exactly the query fanouts that were done if you're using the web version of ChatGPT, for example. So there are inexpensive or even free ways to to research this to better understand what a prompt might generate in terms of those query fanouts. And are you in them? Are you included in those query fanouts? Would your brand, would you get a citation out of that? Do you have content that would be relevant or germane to those query fanouts? We really need to shift how we think about content. And this is a good way to kind of understand and dig into that.
You mentioned you guys have a tool for this. Just quick name drop. Where can we find that?
Yeah. xofu.com. And if you want the free, simple, don't have to sign up for anything version, you can go to xofu.com/BOFU. XOFU is think about anywhere in the funnel, the customer journey, and BOFU is bottom of funnel. Yeah. xofu.com/BOFU. And you can just put in your URL. It'll show you, the simulated query fan out. It will show you, it'll try to predict what brands you're competing against, and it will show you whether you and those brands are showing up in the prompt responses on ChatGPT and other platforms as well.
So doesn't query fan out and this approach that we're seeing, doesn't it just mean that we're just getting an opportunity at more visibility as a brand?
Yeah, that's for sure what it means. And we have that opportunity, and it will tell, most of the tools are going to show whether you're getting that visibility or not. So in terms of kind of bringing full circle to earlier part of the conversation where we were talking about how we get more visibility in AI prompt responses in those conversations, this is a way for you to understand where you are today in terms of that visibility and the types of content that you could focus on to add value to those prompts, to those queries, in order to be cited in the prompt response.
Amazing. So I want to talk about something you mentioned before, and I'm going to mix it up with something else. There's a term called money pages, and then there's a term called FUQ. We all know FAQ, but you're bringing FUQ, which is called frequently unasked questions. Can you tell me a bit about what the term means, why it should matter to people? And if you're trying to grow in search or the query answer, question answering market, like how do you use it? And does it play into your money pages?
That's a great question. I want to talk about FAQs for just a brief moment first, because FAQs have devolved into, essentially some things that we want to, especially when they're used on money pages. Money page is your sales landing page. Where does the transaction or the conversion happen? That's what we call a money page. Essentially it's where the money changes hands from that visitor to that brand. And so that's a money page, sales landing page, where your conversions happen. And FAQs have really been almost misused. They're essentially, they've become a list of selling points for the brand sort of thing. How do I want to sneak some additional content into my page in a way that can be collapsed and it doesn't affect my conversion rate, et cetera, et cetera. How can I just sneak some content in there, usually for SEO purposes, not for human purposes, and sell that internally kind of thing. And so we end up with just things that are like, how can this product be used for a particular scenario? We're trying to get signals about our ICP and our product alignment kind of thing. What are the dimensions of my product? These are not necessarily bad uses. We want that content available, but a frequently asked question in its from the way that I think about it is this should be perceived as the core elements of the buyer journey that may not be known to that user that they're going to have questions about. Essentially, they're kind of like query fanouts. What would I like this site visitor, this page visitor to know to better inform them about this particular transaction? That's at its core, I think, what frequently asked questions should be. Now, what frequently unasked questions are essentially all the things that site visitor doesn't know to ask, but that are critical to either the the decision making process, is this the right product for me, essentially? And we tend to stay away from those as brands because we don't want to convince someone not to convert on our page. And so we sometimes avoid those hard hitting questions that would actually give them what they need to know to make a more informed decision and potentially realize, oh, actually, this isn't quite the right product for me. Not recognizing the trust we build as we do that, that's going to more likely result in them continuing to explore and engage with our content versus pogo sticking back to search results and finding someone else. But that's our fear, is they're going to go pick someone else in the traditional search results, which that paradigm is really shifting as well. But it's also the reason why we call them frequently unasked questions. It's also all of the things that our ICP, especially for more complex transactions, but even simple ones, is representing behind the scenes this purchase decision committee, we call it. All the people involved, whether it's family members for a consumer product purchase, or a subscription, or it's an entire committee, an actual committee of people behind the scenes for maybe an enterprise SaaS sort of offering, that the individual user tasked with doing the searching and making the final decision, maybe reporting back throughout that process, doesn't know to ask, essentially. That's the key, is these really important factoids that person should be asking and should be researching, but they just don't realize they should be asking. So imagine we've got this committee in the background. It's of course someone in the purchasing department. It's the direct users of this software. Maybe it's accounting and it's some sort of financial service that they're using, is some sort of subscription-based model. Then you've got tech ops that's going to be involved with implementing it. You have the end users within the company that will need to be feeding information into it. Maybe it's, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but it's like, I just came back from a conference, so I'm thinking about submitting my expenses that I had to charge personally as part of the process, et cetera, with our booth and everything else. And so maybe it's expense reimbursement software. And so all the teams in that organization that are going to have that are going to be impacted by that decision, and the experts that represent those individual, teams, what would they, if they were staring at the screen, you've got little heads behind me here, they're all looking together, what are they going to ask? And am I able to make sure that I get the answers to those things if they're not there right in my ear saying, oh, ask this. Oh, what about that? Oh, here's this other thing that is really important for me to know. That could result in the absolute worst case scenario for everyone involved. Tech ops spends a bunch of time trying to implement this. It turns out that it doesn't integrate with core critical components from other teams. It breaks something in the background. It breaks our website, for example. Maybe now we've got marketing and sales. They're screaming at us because we broke the site. We took the site down. It breaks something else. We could easily, if we don't get those questions answered, we could easily result in that worst case scenario, kind of the nightmare scenario that we're all afraid of, which is true for every sort of scenario kind of thing. So this represents the friction points that might either stop a conversion from happening. We can think about it as a cart abandon, or it might in simple terms, or we might think of it in terms of a chargeback, a return of a product, the cancellation of a service because we didn't get enough information up front to that ideal customer as they're making that decision, representing all of the people behind them that are involved with what happens after the decision is made. We could very easily run into that worst case scenario or stop the transaction from happening in the first place. So a frequently unasked question is that question that the viewer didn't know to ask, but that would have otherwise helped them make a more informed, better decision if they had been able to get that answer in the first place.
And I think it's a question that we shouldn't be afraid to ask, because the people that resonate with it will only fall in love with us more. And I think the benefit of that, I think, outweighs the risk of potentially losing a visitor that actually wasn't that interested. You just opened their eyes. So, James, this has been an amazing conversation. I could fill another episode with you, but I've absolutely loved talking to you. the depth and the knowledge that you, as an individual, as a representative of Citation Labs, is immense. I mean, I feel like I've did a deep dive into your brain, and thank you for that thought, for that experience into your brain, and sharing your thoughts. I'm a bit flabbergasted right now. So I want to make sure that people know where to find you, where to know like where you are. I have a few things already. James Wirth, obviously, citationlabs.com. And if you want to find out what you look like in a query fan method, go to exofu.com/bofu. I'm going to say it xofu.com/bofu. That's how I said it. But exofu.com/bofu, citationlabs.com. James Wirth. Is there anything else you want to call out or shout out? It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Sean, thank you so much for having me on the show. I hope there's some value for your audience. It's a great show. I encourage people to tune in. I've watched a number of episodes. It really is great content. I love your questions. You know, the way that you ask questions based on where you have been in your career trajectory has been fascinating as well. And that's brought a lot of experiential depth to the questions that you ask. It feels like a real deep dive, not just a kind of surface level conversation. So I really appreciate that aspect of it for sure. I would say, yeah, LinkedIn is a great way to connect. I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Great conversations happening there. We could kind of give each other some guardrails around just the overwhelming nature of LinkedIn right now when it comes to AI. A great shout out to me would be, hey, somebody has a question about link building or SEO in general. Some of the topics that we've talked about today, I've spent my career kind of building a position on. And so I'm happy to go deeper if anyone is curious. That would be meaningful to me. But otherwise, I have been thrilled I've been looking forward to this. I've been thrilled to have these conversations with you. I really appreciate your time. And I hope that, that the conversations will continue.
If I can say one thing, it's been extremely valuable. I think every person will agree with that. James, thank you very much.